Okay. Iconic yellow jumpsuits and red raincoats. Shady Bible salesman. Mean streets and badlands. Long goodbyes. A holy mountain. And finding out that Soylent Green was indeed made of people. It's time to live and let die as we dissect 1973, a year with a fantastic planet of movies. So let's find out if the power of Christ compels us to agree that The Sting is the best film of that year, or if we decide on something else. My name's Andrew, and I welcome you back to the Revisionist Almanac, the show that gets into the time machine, takes a deep dive into past Academy Awards ceremonies, and determines what the voters got right that year, and more importantly, what they got wrong. Now, this is a celebration on this episode because it's the 12th and it's the final episode of Season 2. And I always like to keep it really loose and casual on my season finales. And I've got somebody here tonight that I am so excited to talk to for the third time now. We've done a couple of shows on his side of things, and now we're over on this side. So let me introduce you to the host of Reels of Cinema. He's coming to us all the way from the East Coast. Say hello to Frank Mandosa. Frank, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. I am so excited for this because we have been talking about planning this. We have been planning this for well over a year, and it's been a very enjoyable process, and I just cannot thank you enough for inviting me to take part in this. So thanks for having me on. Thank you,
Oh
man.
man, it's a blast. So for people who don't follow Reels of Cinema, and if you don't, definitely check out everything Frank's doing over there. We have done 2 Nightmare on Elm Street movies in consecutive years, and it's a sort of an annual tradition for Frank and myself now. And 1973 is a lot of fun because there are some horror movies that probably are going to come up at some point throughout this thing. So if you want to listen to all of Frank and my horror thoughts on Freddy Krueger, go check out his page. I'll have a link in the description so you can check out everything Frank's doing over there. And originally, Frank and I were going to have a second guest with us here tonight. He's a Hollywood producer from the West Coast. He's a cinephile himself. That was Ralph Esparza. However, unfortunately, Ralph had somebody really near and dear to him unexpectedly pass away. And he needs a little bit of time, understandably, to deal with things far greater than what we are doing here tonight, which is very silly in the grand scheme. So I just want to say, on behalf of the podcast, I want to offer Ralph my deepest condolences, and I want him to know we're going to continue keeping him, his family, in our hearts, in our thoughts, in our prayers. I know Frank probably feels the exact same way as I do. We were very excited to talk to Ralph, but I completely understand that he has much greater things to deal with right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ralph and I have not met, but my hat goes out to you, Ralph, and hopefully our paths will cross eventually. I'm really looking forward to meeting you someday.
I know Ralph was very, very excited to do this, and I promise him at some point in the future I will get him back on. However, even though Ralph can't be here with us in person, he did put in the prep time, and I have received his revised category winners, so I will be including those alongside Frank and myself, so Ralph can still be part of the equation because he definitely deserves to do that for all the time I know he put in as well. So just a reminder for everybody, this show looks back on past Academy Awards ceremonies with the luxury of hindsight to determine what should have won in Best Picture, Best Director, and the 4 acting categories. Before we start things off, though, I hope you'll take time to rate and review the channel on whatever podcast platform you're using, as well as finding and following the show on every social media platform. The handle is Rev Almanac. Okay, so we're here for 1973. For those who might not be familiar with that year, the Best Picture winner was, of course, George Roy Hill's caper movie, The Sting. All right, Frank, you're a first-time guest. This is the very first time you've experienced this type of prep project. This is always my first question to people who have done this for the first time. How did you find this journey? What was your experience like taking this deep dive?
The best way to answer that question is to say that it has been an embarrassment of riches. Going back and taking a look at films from previous generations is something that I live for. On my previous podcast, one that I've now retired, it was called Silver Screeners. I always used to have a quote from Lauren Bacall in the intro. It's not an old movie if you haven't seen it, which I absolutely 100% am on board with that sentiment of hers. So going back and revisiting films that I have seen before, but revisiting them in a new context, preparing for this, as well as films that I'd always heard of but never had actually seen. This has been, as far as my podcasting experience has gone, this has been truly one of the biggest highlights. So again, thank you for affording me this opportunity. This has been a great time going back and taking a look at this year.
Now, Frank, in terms of you had mentioned we've basically had this thing plotted out for over a year at this point. Were you like kind of slow rolling, watching a little bit at a time, or did you sort of take a crash course over the last month or two? Because I think everybody approaches this a little bit differently. What was your strategy for somebody who's maybe listening right now that's going to take the plunge in the future?
My strategy was first to take the list of films that I could find. I Googled films released in 1973. And then I just copied and pasted, and in a Google Doc, I made a list of all the films. Films that I had seen, films that I had not seen, films that I knew, films that I had never heard of. And what I did was I then grouped them into separate categories. Have seen, have not seen, have never heard of. I just created all those mini categories, and then I just tackled them one category at a time, to be honest. I will say that it was slow moving at first. I think in the back of your mind, oh, well, I have a year. So I didn't dive right in right away, because I also figured that if I watched too much of it too soon, that by the time we got to tonight, it would be out of my head, or at least the nuances, the details would be out of my head. So I would say that I watched the bulk of them over the summer months. And then I've watched several over the past, I would say over the past month and a half.
There's a real
Most of them,
there's an arc to it for sure.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's different for everybody. What works for me might not work for somebody else. What works for them might not work for me. If as long as it gets the job done, then it honestly doesn't matter. And this has been a labor of love.
Indeed, it has, and you'll probably want to as most people say when they do this prep project, they want to distance themselves from the year once they've sort of like purged this episode, and they're like, okay, I can watch anything from any other year now. I've taken everything I can from the year I've just spent tackling. And I mean, 1973, as you said, is an embarrassment of riches. We'll have a lot of stuff we can talk about and unpack in all these different movies, but I want to get to I've got a spicy take before we get into the categories, and then I'll turn it over to you if you have a specific take you have. But the one thing that I found about this year when I really unpacked it in totality, this year kind of gets forgotten a little bit in terms of it's sandwiched between The Godfather in 72 and The Godfather Part 2 in 74. And I think that this year is greater top to bottom than either of those 2 years. Now, I have not yet done this type of format for either of those years. Those will be in future seasons. So I'm going to put the chip down now that I think this is the greater year, but I do have the right to change my opinion down the road. But this year is stacked. It is ridiculous how influential so many of these movies are this year. And so that's my hot take is 72 and 74 are epic years with all-time great Best Picture winner. However, I think 1973 might be one of the great years of all time. It's just a phenomenal year. So that's my hot take. I don't know if you have anything that you want to kind of talk about in terms of the overview of this whole year after watching all these movies.
Whether it's a hot take or not, I suppose, is up to the listeners. But I will say my hot take for 1973, and we'll get to this when we get to each category. We'll get into more detail about it. But the sting for Best Picture felt to me like a consolation prize for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I think that Paul Newman and Robert Redford, they were magic together. They only did those 2 films together, but the Mandela effect, people think that they have worked together so often. They only did those 2 films. I would not say that this was the better of the 2. And I know that that's probably heresy to a lot of people, especially since we just lost Robert Redford just a little bit over a month ago. So, I mean, no disrespect to him or to the film. It is an enjoyable film, but Best Picture material, I would have to quote Aunt Gladys from Weapons, I would have to create the salt line and not cross it there.
Okay, so you threw the gauntlet down very early with the sting. I will keep myself a little closer to the vest for now, but we'll see if I share that opinion. Before we get to the categories, though, I do want to kind of highlight maybe some bad movies that you didn't have a great time watching, or if you want to talk about some movies that you know you're not going to get to once we get to the categories, but you still just want to shout out. a couple of movies that you had a good time with. So I'll start off and then jump over to you. I was really impressed with all the movies I watched from '73. There was only one that I would objectively say I don't ever want to revisit for the rest of my life, and that's Bernardo Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris, which the butter scene I find so troubling. Both what happens on screen and the real life stuff that happened to Maria Schneider. That movie just hurt me so much. It was probably the second or third time I've ever seen the film. But with 2025 eyes, it was really excruciating to go back and watch it. And I don't think I will ever want to experience that movie again. I will let you have a rebuttal if you want in a moment, but I'll quickly shout out a couple of movies that I did have a good time with on the flip side that I unfortunately will not have the time to talk about later. Number one, I am just a sucker for Pam Grier. Ever since I saw Jackie Brown and then eventually went back through her back catalog, I love Coffee. That came out in 1973, and Pam Grier's one of the icons of that era. I just find her just radiant on screen, and so it was wonderful to go back to Coffee. I wish I could have gotten her into my Best Actress, so I'm kind of, throwing my cards out there now that she will not make my Best Actress 5, but I had a really great time watching Coffee again. And then I had a first-time experience with a film called Tuki Buki, which is part of the Martin Scorsese World Cinema Project. It's on the Criterion Channel. It can actually be streamed on HBO Max, but it's a film out of Senegal. It's not a really well-known movie, but if you want to experience a film from a different culture, from a different time, a different place, I would recommend checking out Tuki Buki. It's up on HBO Max and it's on Criterion. It was a really great experience and a window into a world I'm not familiar with. So that would be my shout out there. Frank, if you want to throw anything about Last Tango or any other bad experiences you had, any good movies, whatever you want to throw out, jump into it here.
There is one film that I will repeat your words. Now that I have seen it, I will never see it again. My mouth opened once you mentioned the title Last Tango in Paris, not because I was going to defend it, but because that's what's on my list of films that I never want to see again. You and I feel the exact same way about it. Now, here's where this is where it's going to be potentially a hot take, or maybe on the flip side, this will be something that is a relatable opinion, but there is a fine line to be drawn between what is considered true, quote unquote, art and what is true, quote unquote, violation / exploitation. Knowing what we know now about the filming of that butter scene, what you are watching when you watch this movie is you are watching a recording of a woman in real life being violated. That is not art. People can say, oh, well, artists, directors, screenwriters, even actors, they can say whatever they want about, oh, well, it was, it's all pat, it was the way that he approached the craft of acting, verisimilitude. I call BS. I call absolute and total BS. Anybody who watches this film and finds something valuable in that scene, I would not want to have a conversation with, because you are watching a rape being recorded, and there is absolutely no way that is art. So, in my opinion, because I do not consider this to be art, I consider it to be degradation and violation to the worst possible degree, especially since it was made so public. I would be perfectly fine with it if all existing prints of this film were to be destroyed. Honestly.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because Bertolucci's career he's got a really wonderful body of work with some really important films. Same goes for Brando, but this movie is despicable. I mean, it was excruciating to revisit. I knew I had to do it. I knew what was coming, but yeah, it was a painful experience to go back to that movie.
Yeah, I truly do not find. I mean, help me out if there's something I'm missing, but I just don't find anything redeeming about it. I really don't. I mean, I could say that the performances were strong, but in that scene at least, she probably wasn't really acting. we were probably seeing her real reactions, and I just don't. Well, I don't want to be privy to that. I really don't. I just don't want to be privy to that kind of thing.
Now, on the flip side, did you have any good experiences that you probably aren't going to mention down the road when the nominees come in?
I did. I did, and I will say that probably the film that I was most surprised by in a good way, was the film version of the iconic stage musical Godspell. Godspell surprised me. It really did. I've seen it on stage. I have performed it on stage in my school years. I have seen everything from community theater productions to student productions. I've seen it downtown in Boston, done professionally. I've seen the film now. I probably have seen this film. I couldn't even tell you how many times. There is just something that is wholesome and down to earth, quirky, eccentric, completely and totally bizarre, corny as hell, and no, it's not the best singing in the world, but they weren't trained singers. No, it wasn't the most lively choreography in the world, but that wasn't the point of it. It I think the best way to describe it is to quote or I should say to paraphrase Roger Ebert. What he said was Godspell simply refuses to be anything other than what it actually is, a series of skits set to songs and jokes and set pieces. It's not about Christianity. It's not about the gospel according to St. Matthew, even though that's what it says in the credits. It's a celebration of theater. It's a celebration of performing arts. You have memes. I'm sorry. You have mimes. You have mimes. You have old. I don't even know what the term for it is, but when you have two actors in a vaudeville show telling jokes to each other, and one of them has the punchline and the other one feeds the line. Tell me, how do you do this? I don't know. How do you do this? Well, you do this, and that's the punchline. And like they had that kind of thing. And probably what was the most, and I hesitate to use this word, but I will use it because it fits, exhilarating. Probably the most exhilarating, in a really strange way, exhilarating was the scene where they're singing and performing a song called All for the Best, which is in the soundtrack, and they're singing and dancing on top of the Twin Towers. And the Twin Towers had just finished construction, or were just about to finish construction at the time that they filmed this. And I just think that that is the power of film, because that preserve nothing will ever, those images are captured forever, and they will never go away. They will always be there. And to me, that to me is art.
Yeah,
So I
it's
just
this little snapshot of life that you'll just sort of have as a place in time forever.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. You can always go back to it. And you can look and you can say, there it once stood. Well, the two of them, they both stood, and here was total joy, happiness, performance on top of it. And I like to think of those kinds of moments.
That's a good pick right there. Okay, well, let's jump over before we get into the 6 categories for people who have followed the last couple of months. We've got a new opportunity for some new categories at play. It's called the Gorham Award for Egregious Oversight. It's named after Betsy and Trent Gorham from the Never Seen It podcast, who originally presented the idea to me. So going forward, every guest and myself can have the opportunity, but there's no obligation to choose any of the categories from any of the categories that we're not covering already and decide if there was an incorrect winner and what we think should have won. And then we're going to turn it over to the power of the voters to decide. So before Frank and I give our pick, I actually have a pick from Ralph as well, who's not here right now. But Ralph wanted to call out the best cinematography category, which went to Cries and Whispers that year. And Ralph's decision was The Way We Were, which I thought was an interesting, surprising pick in that category. So we will give it to the audience to decide what should have won Best Cinematography that year. The Way We Were, which was Ralph's pick, or the actual winner, Cries and Whispers. Now, Frank, do you have something that you would like to nominate for this category or this award?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I would like to throw in Is it okay if I throw a name in as a nominee, not necessarily the winner?
Sure, go for it.
Does that be all right? Not even nominated, Egregious Oversight, Kyle Anderson in the film version of Jesus Christ Superstar. He played Judas, and mother of God, does this guy have pipes? He is, I have never heard any, and I had the pleasure when I was in college in the mid 90s, 30 years ago. I'm old. I remember that my roommate and I, who was also just as much of a Jesus Christ Superstar fan as I am, neither one of us. I'm not into musicals, which is ironic since I just mentioned Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. I'm not a musical fan per se. I don't gravitate towards them. I'm not saying that there aren't good ones. There certainly are, and I'm certainly not ignoring the talent involved. Plenty of talent involved in them. It's just not my go-to genre. However, JC Superstar is one of the few exceptions, and ever since college, my roommate Hugh, he and I have loved this musical, the film. I had the good fortune of seeing Kyle Anderson perform it live on stage in Boston when I was in college, and I said, "Oh my God, Judas from the movie, not from any of the subsequent soundtrack renditions, but the Judas from the movie, Kyle Anderson. If we have a chance to see him live, we have a chance. We're going to go see him live." So the fact that with his charisma, his appropriately for the character, his appropriately aggressive on-screen charisma, just you don't dare to take your eyes off this guy. And if that's not acting, if that's not screen presence, then I defy the Academy to tell me, well, then what is? So there's my egregious oversight. Kyle Anderson should have been at the very least, nominated for
That's a
JC Superstar.
that's a great pick, Frank. Okay, well, I'm going to flip the script on Ralph, unfortunately, who nominated The Way We Were for something that didn't win, and I'm going to actually try to take something away from The Way We Were. Apologies to Barbara Streisand, who I've taken some shots at over the last year and a half on this show. Best original song, I think The Way We Were is a good song. However, I think the superior original song in 1973 was Paul and Linda McCartney's Live and Let Die, which I think is one of the great anthems. And so for me personally, I think Live and Let Die should have won Best Original Song over The Way We Were. And ultimately, I will turn that over to the listeners and the voters to decide if they agree with me or not. Now, full disclosure, I am a Beatles fanatic, and so anything that John, Paul, George, and Ringo do, I'm going to always stand for. And Live and Let Die is definitely one of those anthemic moments in Paul's career post Beatles. So that's going to be my pick right there.
That song is a banger. It is such a banger.
There's nothing wrong with The Way We Were. It's a great song, but when Live and Let Die hits, it just that song hits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All I can think of is Jennifer Lawrence in American Hustle dancing around to it.
Yes, exactly. It continues to live on. All right, well, before we do get into the categories, it's worth mentioning if Frank and I agree with anything that actually won in the 6 categories we're going to dive into, that selection will skip the online process and it will immediately go into the Almanac. So what we're going to do is we're going to list off what was nominated. We're going to wipe the slate clean, and we're each going to make our own nominations and our own winner selections. So with that out of the way, Frank, are you ready to dive into the categories?
I am ready. I'm nervous and I'm ready.
All right, let's rewrite some history. Okay, so we're going to start in Best Supporting Actress here first. So in 1973, for those that aren't familiar, the actual nominees that year were Candy Clark for American Graffiti, Linda Blair for The Exorcist, Madeline Kahn for Paper Moon, Sylvia Sidney for Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, and the winner at the ceremony was Tatum O'Neal for her work in Paper Moon. Now, at the age of 10 years and 148 days old, Tatum O'Neal became the youngest winner of an Oscar, which is a feat that is still unmatched to this day. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start things off and set the tempo, and that way I don't put Frank on the hot seat right away. I will jump onto the flames myself. So I will go in first, and then I'll turn over to Frank to give his nominations and his winner. So I will start by saying I'm just coming off the heels of a 2003 Revisions Almanac episode, and I had it really good in this category in 2003. I don't have it so good here in 1973, and I sound like a broken record. This is the third time I've covered the 70s this season. They just didn't give women opportunities enough in the 1970s compared to what we now get. Um, it's just a matter of fact. It was a much more male dominated driven industry, and the women unfortunately sort of ended up in the sidelines in a lot of situations, and so there's just a lack of depth. But there are still at least 5 performances that I think are great, and so I'll shout out a couple of honorable mentions, and then I'll get into my 5. My 2 honorable mentions I have are Laurie Heineman for Save the Tiger. And then I've also got Sylvia Sidney for Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, who was one of the nominees. I think she did a very good job, but she didn't quite make my 5. So here are the 5 women that I have given my nominations to. And what I will do is I will give them alphabetically by the order of the film. So my first nomination is going to go to Ingrid Thulin as Karen in the film Cries and Whispers. My second nomination is going to go to another actress in Cries and Whispers. I've got Liv Ullmann, who plays Maria. This is also the second time I've nominated Liv Ullmann. I nominated her in 1976 for the film Face to Face, another Bergman film. My third nomination is going to go to Valentina Cortese as Severine in the film Day for Night. Now, this is far from my favorite Truffaut film, but I think that Cortez is really good in the movie nonetheless. My fourth nomination is going to go to Madeline Kahn as Trixie Delight in Paper Moon. She is hilarious in this movie, and for people who don't remember history, this is 1 year prior to her famous role in Blazing Saddles, which I think is significantly more iconic, but I think what she does in Paper Moon is like a great blueprint for what she was about to go on and do with her career beyond this point. And then my fifth nomination is going to go to Tatum O'Neal as Addie Loggins in the film Paper Moon. So I've got 2 nominees from Cries and Whispers, 2 nominees from Paper Moon. Surprisingly, my number 2 ranked choice here was actually Valentina Cortese for Day for Night. That was a first time watch for me. I've seen a lot of the Bergman a lot of the Truffaut movies, but I haven't seen that one. But really, quite honestly, Frank, there was never any doubt what was going to get my win here. It was going to be Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon. For me, she was miles ahead of the other 4 women, as great as they were. I think Tatum O'Neal gives one of the great child acting performances of all time in this movie. The script is obviously very, very strong, and she's working alongside her father, which certainly is going to help her familiarity. But I don't know, the way that she elevates this character, she's tough as nails, she's just street smart, she's witty, she's clever, she's so dynamic at her age. And for people who don't know, Ryan O'Neal and Tatum O'Neal had a very tumultuous relationship in real life. That certainly plays into the dynamic between their 2 characters. But I love that she goes toe to toe with him the whole film. She is, for me, the best part of Paper Moon, which is a great movie on its own. And so I am going to agree with the Academy here, and I think that Tatum O'Neal, for me, deserves the win. So, Frank, I will turn it over to you now. Feel free to throw out any honorable mentions you have, and then jump in with the 5 women that you've decided to nominate and who you're going to win.
Okay, well, I do not have any honorable mentions because I actually found this category. I am not going to use the word slim, but I will say that this category for me was pretty much a no-brainer. So I have as my 5 nominees, I have Linda Blair for The Exorcist. I have Madeline Kahn and Tatum O'Neal both for Paper Moon. I do have Valentina Cortese for Day for Night. And I have Yvonne Elliman from Jesus Christ Superstar. She plays Mary Magdalene, and she sings I Don't Know How to Love Him. She sings Everything's All Right. She does really, really well with what could have been a very thin role. As for Tatum O'Neal, I agree that she gives an extremely strong performance. She shows, as a young kid, she shows these signs of acting talent that a lot of child actors just do not have, especially for a genre like this. She commanded the screen. I think that she certainly Another hot take. I think that she buried her father Ryan in every scene that they had together. You know, Linda Blair, I know that there was controversy about the fact that they used body doubles and the fact that it wasn't her voice, it was Mercedes McCambridge. I get all of that, and I don't know the details of what the Academy's rules are and whether or not that would have deemed her ineligible for the nomination. But let's face it, Linda Blair, she kicked ass. There is no way that this movie has the reputation that it does. There's no way that this movie has the staying power that it does, and that it is consistently ranked at the top of some of the best horror films ever made. There is no way that any of that would be possible if it were not for this fiery, intense performance. Okay, so she's wearing makeup. Okay, show me. So does that mean that Robin Williams, because he wore makeup in Mrs. Doubtfire, does that mean his performance was any less? I think that if I were to suggest that a lot of people would hunt me down with pitchforks and torches. So, and I would agree, because I would say rightfully so, because he was fantastic. That was 1993. I get that. Back to Linda. I don't think the fact that she was under prosthetics and makeup that added to the performance. It didn't take away from in the slightest. And then the fifth person I have. Oh no, I already mentioned all 5 nominees. Linda Blair, Yvonne Elliman, Madeline Kahn, Tatum O'Neal, Valentino Pateza. So this was a tough, razor-thin line between my 2 top contenders. My top 2 I gave to Linda Blair for The Exorcist and Madeline Kahn for Paper Moon, because Madeline Kahn is a goddess. She is a legend. She can be funny. She can be appropriately, annoyingly grating, like in What's Up, Doc. She is just, I mean, flames on the side of my face. I mean, how can you not love this woman? One is a child performance for the ages in a horror film that has, for the past 51 years, 52 years. The other one is an actress who never got her flowers from the Academy. Well, neither one of them did, but this was a tough one. So, what I did was I sat down.
You're sweating.
I just went back and I'm sweating, and I'm gonna kill the suspense. I am not gonna drag this episode length out unnecessarily. So I am just gonna close my eyes. I'm gonna throw the darts, and I'm gonna say, "Give that damn Oscar to Madeline Kahn."
That's a great pick. I love it.
She nails every film she has ever done. She nailed every sketch with Grover and Sesame Street that she ever did. Not every actor can do that.
All right. Madeline Kahn on the board for Paper Moon. And just so people out there are wondering, Ralph has also joined the equation. He gave me his revised winner in this category. And Ralph agreed with myself and the Academy, actually, with Tatum O'Neal. So what that means is we will have a battle for this movie right here in my hands. Paper Moon is going to go head-to-head. We're going to put the 2 women side by side, and we'll see who comes out of that battle. So for the online listeners, you will have the option to vote for Tatum O'Neal, who is picked by myself, Ralph, and the Academy, or you can give Madeline Kahn her flowers alongside Frank. So we're going to put Paper Moon up against each other and see what comes out of that one. That's a great pick right there. Okay, and I will also say, because people are probably thinking, Andrew, wait a minute. You didn't include Linda Blair in your 5. You didn't include her in your honorable mentions. You're correct. Linda Blair, I moved to Best Actress Lead contention. I played a little category manipulation.
Okay.
I'll explain it in a bit, but I decided to move Linda over to the lead actress category. Expect to hear her name later. I'll leave it at that. All right. Let's move over to the supporting actor side. Let's see what happens on this side now. Okay. So, for 1973, the Academy that year nominated Vincent Gardenia for Bang the Drum Slowly. They nominated Jason Miller in The Exorcist, Randy Quaid in The Last Detail, Jack Gilford in Save the Tiger, and the Oscar went to John Houseman for The Paper Chase. All right, Frank, you're going to take the lead on this one. So any honorable mentions you have, and then jump into your 5.
The honorable mention that I have, and I'm just going to come out and say it. The honorable mention that I have is somebody who is not actually an actor. He was a real life priest. He had a featured role in The Exorcist. He played Father Dyer. He played the priest who gives Jason Miller's character his final rites at that iconic ending when he goes tumbling down the stairs out the window. Father Dyer served as a spiritual consultant for the film. He was not a trained actor. He was only too happy to be involved in the production. He has been involved in subsequent commentaries and making of documentaries and looks backs and things like that. I wouldn't deem him worthy of a nomination, primarily because William Friedkin used some questionable methods to get some reactions out of him. The scene when he is giving Father Karras his last rites, he just was not giving, Father Dyer was not giving the shakiness, the intensity that William Friedkin was looking for. So Friedkin walked over to him and said, "Do you trust me?" "No, of course I trust you." Wham! Slaps him right across the face. And he said, and I quote, "When my hand is shaking as I'm doing the sign of the cross, that is not acting, that's nerve juice." So, yeah, I think that he needs to get a shout out, if anything, for suffering at the hands of a very ego driven auteur.
Friedkin was known for pushing the boundaries at all costs.
Anything to get the shot that he wanted.
Yep.
Safety and common sense be damned.
All right, well, what do you got for your 5 then, Frank?
Okay, so I have here for my 5 a lineup that I had a really particularly good time with, because these are some performances that are among my favorites in all film anywhere. Okay, so my first nominee is the excellent Jason Miller for The Exorcist. He gives a brooding intensity that really complements the tone of the film. He owns the tone of the film, if that makes any sense. He makes the film tonally what it is. And any actor who is able to pull that off, they deserve that cred. I also have as a nominee John Houseman for the Paper Chase. John Houseman. Now, my first knowledge of John Houseman as a kid was as Ricky Schroeder's grandfather in the sitcom Silver Spoons. Then I knew him as the driving instructor in The Naked Gun. Extend your arm, extend your middle finger. Very good, well done. So that alone, I mean, I would say probably that my inclusion of him in this list is it's probably a career achievement award because he was just so droll in everything he did. I also have Sir Anthony Hopkins from A Doll's House. He plays Torvald, and he is one miserable, misogynistic, condescending, self-important, egotistical, vain, arrogant SOBs that ever filled the role of a husband in any work of fiction whatsoever. Doll's House is a play from the 1800s by Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen, and there have been a lot of film versions over the years. This particular year actually saw 2 versions. We had one with Claire Bloom and Anthony Hopkins, and then we had another one with Jane Fonda. But if I had to pick which Torvald is the stronger of the two, Anthony Hopkins, he gets that slot in the nominees list for me. Okay. I also have Vincent Gardenia for Bang the Drum Slowly. This is a man, an actor, an artist who sings, acts, had absolutely no problem making himself look foolish for a good laugh. I'm not saying necessarily in this film, but anytime there is an actor who is willing to do something that would make themselves look ludicrous, physically ludicrous, Will Ferrell walking around Times Square dressed as an elf, for example. Anytime an actor is willing to subjugate themselves to what most people would say, wow, this is humiliation, where is your pride? And if they say, no, this is good for a laugh, this is for the comedy, it's for the betterment of this project, I have all the respect in the world for. Lucille Ball, a clown who had no problem making silly faces or de-glamorizing herself to, for a good laugh, jumping around in a vat of grapes and getting her skin all stained. So I would say for that alone, for that alone. Vincent Gardenia. He did a lot of nonsensical drivel in his featured recurring role in the sitcom All in the Family. He was Frank Lorenzo, the neighbor, and he was very unhappy with that role because he was a musical man. And I mean, he was in Little Shop of Horrors in 1986, and his song got cut. Now, I probably feel a little bit more defensive of him than I otherwise would, because when I was in college, I was in Little Shop of Horrors, and I played the role that he plays in the film. So the fact that his song was cut, that makes me say, whoa, wait a minute. You're depriving viewers of the full Little Shop experience here. But he's still stuck with the film. A lot of actors would have said, oh, well, if you're cutting my song, then I'm out. But he's stuck with the film. For whatever his reasons may have been, the betterment of the project. I have respect for that. He looked like an idiot. He sounded like an idiot. He was supposed to look and sound like an idiot, his character in All in the Family. And then here he is in The Paper Chase, doing what he does here. Talk about versatility. So that man deserves to be in this list. The fifth and final nominee that I have, and I cannot believe that he was not nominated for anything. The one, the only, the majestic, voluminous Christopher Lee for The Wicker Man. If you need to take a look at an actor who drips and oozes evil and sadism, mind control, this is the guy that you want. I mean, yeah, Lord of the Rings, the Star Wars prequels, younger generations know him from those films, but this guy, next to Vincent Price and next to Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. and all of them, the whole crew, Elsa Lanchester, Una O'Connor, great actors, all of them. They all deserved more than they got rather than being typecast. Christopher Lee took that to a whole new level with his portrayal of Lord Summerisle. And every time I say his name, I just feel the need to sing that tentpole song. Summerisle. But I won't, even though I just did. So out of those 5 nominees, if I had to pick one that I would say is the winner, no. I say this for the 8th time, 9th time, hot take, but the Oscar goes to Christopher Lee for The Wicker Man.
Awesome pick right there, Frank. All right.
He's irreplaceable.
That's so good. For people who, I know there are people who probably think that they're like horror averse because they don't like the scary stuff. I would recommend, even if you don't think you like horror films, check out The Wicker Man. It is not your prototypical horror movie. It is incredibly frightening, and there's a overall sense of dread throughout that whole movie, but it's much different than your typical modern day horror film. So I would recommend, if you feel a little trepidatious going into the horror pool, don't be afraid of The Wicker Man. Check it out. It is worth exploring that movie because it's a lot of different things, and it's really great, and Christopher Lee absolutely makes that movie awesome. I did not think you were going in that direction. That is a phenomenal pick right there. Okay, well, before we get to my pick, I will shout out Ralph's pick as well. So Ralph did nominate for his revision one of the people you had in your 5. He actually had Jason Miller for The Exorcist. So Jason Miller will also be at play when we eventually get to an online vote. But let's jump over to my 5 now, and then we'll see where we stand. So I think this was a really great category. I could go on for a while with some honorable mentions, but I'll keep it pretty brief. I love this era of the 1970s, and what Peter Boyle does in The Friends of Eddie Coyle, I think, is a really fantastic performance. I love The Friends of Eddie Coyle, and I love these kind of like gritty 70s movies. They just, I don't know, they make me feel good. So he's just on the outside looking out. I also thought Dustin Hoffman and Papillon was pretty strong. That's not my favorite movie, but I think Dustin Hoffman does a really good job in there. And then I also really love in The Long Goodbye Sterling Hayden. So those would be my honorable mentions. But as far as my actual 5 nominees, here would be the gentlemen that I have in. So I've got Max von Sydow as Father Merrin in The Exorcist. I decided with him over Jason Miller, and it's not a knock on one. I just think that when Sydow shows up, he's so incredible in that movie. And the thing that I always think about when I think about him in that movie is he looks 80 years old at that time. And then when I see him years later, he looks the same. Like, it feels like he didn't age a day. Like, it feels like he's always looked the same to me until I go back and watch like The Emigrants or the New Land, which are films where he definitely looks younger. But it's just amazing how well they made Sydow look as Father Merrin in The Exorcist, and I just think he brings such a gravitas to that movie once we get into his portion of it. So he's in my 5. I've also got Randy Quaid as Seaman Lawrence M. Meadows, aka Larry in The Last Detail. This was probably one of the later Quaid movies I've seen over my life in terms of I'm of an age where I remember him most from like the National Lampoon's Vacation movies. But going back and watching him in The Last Detail, he's always had kind of that like sort of dumb naivete that he does so well. And I think in The Last Detail, he's got a sensitivity to him, and again, he's got that naive nature about his character, and I think he really grounds that film with some heart alongside the two gentlemen who were escorting him around, and so I think he deserved a nomination there. My third nomination is going to go to Robert De Niro as Johnny Boy in Mean Streets. This is not surprisingly the third time I've nominated De Niro. I've nominated him in Taxi Driver and Cape Fear in previous episodes. What he does as Johnny Boy in Mean Streets, incredible. I've got Robert Shaw as my fourth nominee as Doyle Lonnegan in The Sting. We are just coming on the heels of me nominating him for Jaws, and so it was really fun to like see the parallel of what he does in The Sting and then what he does in Jaws, which are two vastly different roles that he's playing. And I think that he really does a nice job of going toe to toe with Redford and Newman in The Sting, and he's definitely an integral part to that movie. And then my fifth nominee, just like you, I've got Christopher Lee as Lord Summerisle in The Wicker Man. I thought I was going to be alone, Frank. I thought I'd be all alone on my little Wicker Man island. He is just menacing in that movie. The eyes are piercing. There's just a look to him in that film that is sheer terror. I was tempted to pick him, like you. I was tempted to pick Randy Quaid. But for me, I'm going to go with, and maybe it's recency bias because I'm just on the heels of watching what is a phenomenal 5-part docuseries on Martin Scorsese's career. But what De Niro does as Johnny Boy in that movie, this is right before, obviously, he gets his win for The Godfather Part 2. This is, right before he really catapults into the stratosphere in Taxi Driver. From the first time he steps on screen in Mean Streets, he steals your attention. He commands your attention. He understood that world. He understood the character. He understood what Martin Scorsese's vision was for the film. And I just think that there's so much dynamic personality from De Niro right from the get-go in that movie. And obviously he does Bang the Drum Slowly this same year. And so this was like a really great opportunity for him to explode to life as an actor. But I don't know, just Mean Streets, when I think of that movie, as great as Harvey Keitel is in Mean Streets, I think of De Niro first and foremost. It sort of feels like he's more of a lead, even though he's kind of secondary in that film. So I'm going to give the win to De Niro. And I will also quickly say to John Houseman, who was the actual winner, I do like your idea of sort of giving him this like lifetime award. I had him at 9 out of all of my gentlemen. Much like you, I sort of most remember him from Silver Spoons much later in his career, and like that was the first thing I remember growing up in that era. But it was the first time I saw The Paper Chase, and I had a pretty good time with it, but it was hard for me to get him in those 5, so I went with De Niro for my pick. All right, so we're going to have 4 different options in this category that you will get to choose from when we get to the vote. So you can side with the Academy and The Paper Chase, John Houseman. If you have not seen The Paper Chase, I would recommend trying to check it out before you do get to the voting so you can at least have an educated decision on what you think of that performance. You can side with Ralph, who went with Jason Miller in The Exorcist. You can side with Frank, who's got Christopher Lee in The Wicker Man. Or you can side with myself. I've got Robert De Niro in Mean Streets. And let's transition now over to Best Actress. So the nominees in 1973 in the lead actress category were Marcia Mason for Cinderella Liberty, Ellen Burstyn for The Exorcist, Joanne Woodward for Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, Barbra Streisand for The Way We Were, and the win that year went to Glenda Jackson for A Touch of Class. All right, Frank, I will take the lead again here, and we'll just kind of flip-flop category to category. As far as honorable mentions, I will say I've got Glenda Jackson on the outside looking in. It's not, I don't think it's the worst Oscars win in the history of the category, but there were just better women for me this year. So she's just not quite in my 5. Apologies to Glenda Jackson. And I've also got Barbara Streisand just outside looking in. I promise for the people out there who have been listening from day one, I'm not a Barbara Streisand hater. I have just never found her roles to be transformative to the degree of some of the other women that I will be nominating. So this is not a shot at Barbara Streisand. I think she's a terrific talent. There are just other actors that I preferred this year. So here are the 5 women I've got in lead actress. I've got Sissy Spacek as Holly in Badlands. 4th time I've nominated Spacek. I've nominated her for Carrie. I've nominated her for In the Bedroom. I've nominated her for Missing. I have been on record saying I think Sissy Spacek's like one of my 10 favorite actresses of all time. I just think the woman hits a home run every time she steps on screen. I don't know if I've ever seen a bad Sissy Spacek performance. I really love what she does in Badlands. She has that innocence from the start and then sort of gets dragged into that world that Martin Sheen takes her into, but she still like has enough of her own conviction at the end to remain sort of tethered to her independence. And I think that's a really strong performance, especially in that time period. And I think it speaks a lot to the quality of Sissy Spacek as an actress at that age. So she's in my 5. I've got Harriet Anderson as Agnes in Cries and Whispers as well. Cries and Whispers is very much an ensemble piece with a lot of great talented women, so it was hard to single out one over the other. But Harriet Anderson definitely deserves a nomination from me. My 3rd nominee is going to go to Julie Christie as Laura Baxter in the film Don't Look Now. Another phenomenal horror film from 1973. What a year for horror. Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland have electric chemistry in that movie. As a parent, I feel what they're going through in a lot of ways. If you have not seen Don't Look Now, I will not spoil it for you. Check it out. But it's definitely dealing with grief over the loss of someone that means a lot to you. And I think Julie Christie does a lot in that movie. Donald Sutherland is definitely at the forefront, but she carries a lot in that film as well. My 4th and 5th nominees are both going to go to The Exorcist. I've got Ellen Burstyn, who plays Chris, the mother, and I've got Linda Blair, who plays Reagan, the daughter. Honestly, this was just, my field was a little bit deeper in supporting actress versus lead actress, and so I wanted to move Linda over here so I could at least acknowledge her greatness in that film. Everything you said, Frank, about Linda Blair previously, I agree with. I think it was preposterous that they didn't respect her talent enough just because somebody else did some voice work or somebody else did this or that. The movie is so much more than her becoming possessed by a demon, or it's all the front stuff that she does when she's showing the innocence of a child and she's going through the struggles and dealing with what's causing her pain. There is so much that Linda brings to that role. She really needs to be recognized. Everything I said about Tatum O'Neal, one of the great child performances, times 2 to Linda Blair. She is iconic in The Exorcist. She deserves all her flowers. She obviously went through a ton of pain in that filming process with the stuff that she was strapped to wear in the bed. And I mean, I know that she took a lot of physical punishment doing that movie, and she deserves all the respect in the world for what she goes through. However, I'm going to give my win to Ellen Burstyn, who plays the mother in that character. That is such an integral role in that film because every time I go back to The Exorcist, especially as a father now, I put myself in the POV of Ellen Burstyn, and the idea of not being able to help your child when they're experiencing some sort of pain or torment and you can't put your finger on what is causing it just like tugs at my heartstrings. It's excruciating. I feel for her character so much, and she's put through such a journey. She's trying as a single mother to, you know, have her own life, have her own career, and still take care of her daughter. I just find Ellen Burstyn to be phenomenal in that film, and so obviously she gets the win in real life in the very next year for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is also a tremendous movie. But I think she's equally as good and equally as deserving for a win as Chris in The Exorcist. That's where I'm going to go with mine. Frank, over to you now.
For the leading actress category, I have an honorable mention, Margot Kidder for Sisters. Now, the reason why I did not include her in the list of nominees, the one detraction was her really bad French accent at the beginning of the film. It was distractingly bad, and I thought, oh, yeah, I can't have you be one of the final five. I'm sorry. I felt like saying, you'll be Lois. Don't worry, you'll be Lois Lane, but you'll have your franchise Adam. So, honorable mention to the otherwise great work that she did in that film. Sisters by Brian De Palma. But my leading actress nominees, I have Jennifer Salt for Sisters. I have Julie Christie for Don't Look Now. I do have Barbra Streisand for The Way We Were, Sissy Spacek for Badlands, and Ellen Burstyn for The Exorcist. And like the supporting actress category, razor thin line. Spacek, Burstyn, Spacek, Burstyn. Both of them ground their films, like you said. I don't think the stories would have been nearly as compelling were it not for the intensity of these two performances. Sissy Spacek may not say much, but it's all in her brooding intensity. And I know I keep using that same phrase, but that's exactly what it is. I always go back to one of the most inconsequential scenes in Badlands. It's only on screen for maybe 7 or 8 seconds. She and Martin Sheen, they're doing this little silly slow motion dance to the song Love is Strange. No dialogue, all you hear is the song, but there is something that is magnetic about the way the two of them, they're facing away from each other, even though they're dancing together. And she has her arms raised up in a strange little, almost as if she's going to hug a dancer standing opposite her who's not really there. So she's dancing like she's holding a beach ball of sorts. And you have him, he has his hands in his hips and he's doing some little skip looking down at the ground. So from that early stage, you already know, okay, this is not a relationship that is going to be working between them because there is no emotional connection. What they have in common is bloodshed and nothing beyond that. Sissy Spacek totally ruled that scene and the entire film. Ellen Burstyn. Ellen. What can you say about an actress who the tears, the frustration, and the abrasiveness that she shows in her frustrations? I love the way that she delivers her lines when she is screaming at Father Karras. She asks him for help, and he says to her, you should take your daughter to a psychiatrist. She completely loses it. She is not playing the simpering, weepy, helpless mother in this moment. In this moment, she is playing the angry parent, the angry mother who is sick and tired of all of the BS that she has been shoveled, and she screams at him. I've been to every effing psychiatrist in town, and they all sent me to you. Now you want to send me back to them. Why won't somebody help me? And she is screaming in his face to a priest. And that's just, it's like, let's put it this way. Mother Love is good box office, and she is the queen. I also think of the scene when she is told that Reagan will need another spinal tap. And I also think of the scene when, and you mentioned Linda Blair getting physical consequences. She was jerked up and down and did damage to her back because William Friedkin just kept the cameras rolling. He did the same thing to Ellen Burstyn. As I'm sure you know, Reagan slaps her. She's supposed to go flying down on her back, and she was yanked on a harness to make the fall look realistic. And she said to William Friedkin, don't pull so hard. And what does he do? He goes and he tells the guy holding the rope or the string or whatever it is, pull harder. And he does. We get a really fantastic shot of her screaming and bellowing in pain. And that is Ellen Burstyn's real scream in pain. She said that she had to go to see a chiropractor. She had developed lifelong back problems. Also, William Friedkin could get his shot. So, with that said, how do you do this? I take solace in the fact, I do take comfort in the fact that both actresses are Academy Award winners. I just don't know if they won for the right films. So that's the problem here, because if I'm going by that, if I want to give the right Oscar to the right performance, then I'm going to have to go with Ellen Burstyn for The Exorcist. She was good, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, but there were too many. I find it impossible to watch that movie without thinking about the horrible sitcom that came after. It just takes away a lot of the film's dramatic impact. So I think that Ellen Burstyn just really, she holds her own against this conglomerate of men all telling her what she should do with her daughter. And one last thing, and then I'll shut up. Her delivery of the line, in total disbelief, almost she is in a disbelieving stupor. She looks at the whole table full of doctors and she says to them, "You're telling me to take my daughter to a witch doctor?" That is a line that so easily could have garnered laughter from the audience because of just how ludicrous it is. Not that the line itself is ludicrous, the situation is ludicrous for her character. To deliver that line, to deliver it believably, and to deliver it so that you gasp instead of chuckle, that's talent. She gets the edge.
I'm glad we're aligned on this one for sure. I had a feeling this might be a spot where we definitely aligned. Um, I always love going back and watching like the videos on YouTube where you can see somebody. I always like watching like that Oscars year and seeing the people win the award. It was very revelatory to me watching this category in real time when it happened, because Ellen Burstyn makes a face when they read Glenda Jackson's name, and she just sort of like looks to the side and says, "Wow," as it like it felt like her time at that moment. And you watching it all these years later, I'm like, "Whew, man, Ellen Burstyn, she really thought she had it in the bag there," and I think it caught her by surprise that she didn't win. Obviously, like I said, she goes on and wins the next year. But to your point, if we're trying to give somebody the win for the correct role, I agree. I think this is the defining Ellen Burstyn role right here. And so you and I are totally in agreement. I will also say Ralph, who participated, he agreed with the Academy. So he felt that Glenda Jackson, in A Touch of Class, deserved the win. I had her at number 6. She was just on the outside looking in. It was really just a matter of the other 5 women I thought were stronger. But when we get to this, we're only going to have 2 women here. We're either going to have Glenda Jackson, who the Academy and Ralph picked together, or we're going to have Ellen Burstyn, who both I picked and Frank picked. So those will be your choices for actress. All right, Frank, we're just going to keep rolling along. You ready to get to the best actor now?
Ready and raring to go. Okay.
Okay, this is quite a field, but the actual nominees that year were Jack Nicholson for The Last Detail, Marlon Brando for Last Tango in Paris, Al Pacino for Serpico, Robert Redford for The Sting, and the main man that year was Jack Lemmon for his performance in Save the Tiger. Now, before I jump over to you, Frank, I will throw out Ralph's pick first, and we'll see if that messes with anything. So Ralph believes that Al Pacino and his performance in Serpico deserves the win. So Pacino is already on the board for Serpico. Why don't you let us know honorable mentions and your 5 gentlemen?
All right. So I have as my honorable mention, I have Max von Sydow for The Exorcist. Now, maybe he wasn't technically the leading actor of the film. Karras certainly has more screen time. But in terms of significance to the story, I think that he definitely, if Kate Winslet wins in the leading category for The Rita, Max von Sydow can win in the leading category for The Exorcist. I give him my honorable mention. But as far as the 5 nominees that I have, Academy, hold my beer, I'll show you how it's done. Okay. The 5 nominees that I have, Kyle Anderson for Jesus Christ Superstar. Just go onto YouTube and watch his performance of Heaven on Their Minds. Just that one song. You don't even have to listen to the title track. You don't have to listen to his performance of Jesus Christ Superstar. Just that one song, the opening scene, Heaven on Their Minds, and you will see it. I also have Robert Mitchum for Friends of Eddie Coyle. This guy, who ever played on screen a better sleaze? Even when he's trying to go straight, even when he's turning rat against his former colleagues, his former criminals, I should say. Even then, he just oozes. You just get the Night of the Hunter vibes from him all the time. I also have Donald Sutherland for Don't Look Now. I think anybody who portrays a parent who is suffering the loss of a child and does so with conviction the way he does, that deserves recognition. I also have Edward Woodward for The Wicker Man. His character. At first, you think to yourself, okay, so he's going to be the protagonist. We're supposed to sympathize with him. And then throughout the first 3/4 of the movie, all he's doing is holier than thou, judging everybody else for their religious beliefs just because he has different religious beliefs. And you just want to tie him up and gag him and say, go, go make some fudge or something. He pulls that off perfectly. Edward Woodward, he is fantastic in The Wicker Man. And then I have as the 5th nominee, Al Pacino for Serpico. And I am doing what I did before in an attempt to give the Oscar to the right performance. I have Al Pacino for Serpico as my Academy Award winner for Best Leading Actor that year. All due respect to Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon is a legend, but not my favorite performance of his. Not that he was bad, just not my favorite performance of his.
All right, so you and Ralph are both together for Pacino. Wonderful picks right there. I'll jump into mine now. So I will agree with you right out of the gate. Jack Lemmon is not getting into my 5. All due respect to him. I actually had him I've got 32 names on a sheet here of all the different nominees that I could have thrown in there. I've got him at 15th, kind of right in the middle. It's just not anywhere near my favorite Jack Lemmon performance. There are so many others I would take over this. All due respect to him, legend of the screen, but there are other gentlemen that I think were far more deserving this year. Honorable mentions, I've got a laundry list, but I think Ryan O'Neal in Paper Moon is a very good performance. I totally agree with you that Tatum O'Neal shreds him to pieces in every single scene. He is done really well by a really strong script. I think this movie is just wire tight. It's perfect. Elliot Gould in The Long Goodbye. Elliot Gould is so friggin' cool to me in that era. I enjoy him. And then, like you, he's not in my 5. He's just on the outside. Robert Mitchum in The Friends of Eddie Coyle. Amen to everything you just said about Robert Mitchum. The Night of the Hunter is an iconic performance, and Eddie Coyle, if you've never seen The Friends of Eddie Coyle, check it out. I think it's on HBO right now, but it's well worth your time. Great piece of 70s filmmaking. Here are the 5 guys, though, that I have in. Number 1, I've got Martin Sheen as Kit in Badlands. I think that Sissy Spacek is the superior of the 2 actors, but Martin Sheen just had so much charisma at that point in time. I mean, they even reference it in the movie. He's sort of got a James Dean look to him in that film. There's just a dashing nature about him. It's very easy to understand why someone like Sissy Spacek's character would easily fall for a person like him in that time period, just the way he looked. And even later in that film, when he gets eventually captured and he's talking to the cops and he's winning them over with his charisma, it's just like that character is so charming that you can't help but like root for him, even though he's doing the most despicable things for the worst possible reasons, like which is just pure evil intentions. He's never trying to do anything for any right reason, but I think Martin Sheen's perfect in that role. I've also got Jack Nicholson as Signalman First Class Billy Badass Badusky in The Last Detail, an iconic name for a character. I've nominated Nicholson multiple times, Reds, The Departed, Cuckoo's Nest. I think he's phenomenal in The Last Detail. I'd seen so many other performances from Nicholson before I eventually got to The Last Detail, and I think that this is really probably the movie that Milos Forman looked at and formed his opinion for wanting to eventually cast him in Cuckoo's Nest, because he lights up the screen here not too far after Easy Rider. My 3rd nominee is going to go to Donald Sutherland, just like you, Frank, for Don't Look Now. He and Julie Christie, I already nominated her. They carry that film. He's front and center, though. It's much more about what's going on with his character and his search for trying to pass through the grief and whatever's going on in his life. And he gives a magnetic performance there. My fourth nominee is Robert Redford as Johnny Hooker in The Sting. It's just that's a movie star performance. If ever there's been a movie star performance, Robert Redford is just lighting up the screen. And then my fifth is going to go to Al Pacino as Frank Serpico in Serpico. Second time I've nominated Pacino. First one was for Dog Day Afternoon earlier this year. This is the second one right here. I prefer him in Dog Day over Serpico if I had to like pick the two that I've nominated. But I do think he is elite talent level in this movie. I promise you, I'm not giving this win to this person just because he recently passed away. My pick was locked in well before a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. I think Robert Redford in The Sting is electric. Like I said, this is like a bona fide movie star performance. He's handsome, he's charismatic, he's charming, he's whimsical, he's sensitive, he's rugged. He's like all of these things encapsulated into one human being. He really could do it all. And it's just phenomenal to me that this is his only ever performance that was nominated on an acting level. Obviously, he wins for Ordinary People in the direction and the Best Picture, but it's crazy to me that Robert Redford was only nominated one time in his career for an acting achievement, and it was this. And I think personally, this should have been a win for him. And so I'm going to say Robert Redford in The Sting is going to deserve the win here. I know he's got stiff competition with Pacino and Jack Lemmon, but let's see what happens. Let's see if Robert Redford can pull out the victory here. So that's where I'm going to go with this one. All right, so we've got three options in the lead actor category. So you can side with the Academy. You can give Jack Lemmon the win. Again, like I said, for the paper chase, if you haven't seen Save the Tiger, check it out. It's worth watching. I think it's up on Canopy right now at the moment. If you've got a library card, you can access it. You can side with both Frank and Ralph. They've got Al Pacino in his Serpico performance. Or you can side with myself. I've got Robert Redford for The Sting. All right, we're going to keep on moving along. We're going to jump over to the Best Director category now, Frank. The nominees in 1973 were George Lucas for American Graffiti, Ingmar Bergman for Cries and Whispers, William Friedkin for The Exorcist, Bernardo Bertolucci for Last Tango in Paris, and the winner, of course, was George Roy Hill for The Sting. All right, I am first up to bat on this one. Okay, I will throw out really quickly Ralph's pick before either of us get in there. So Ralph decided to go with William Friedkin for his win for The Exorcist. So Friedkin's on the board there. Here are my honorable mentions. Again, a great year. There were a lot of innovative filmmakers in 1973. The 70s, I think, really pushed the edge of cinema, and basically everything that we've seen since the 70s has been fueled by what these directors were doing at this time, and just the sort of creative ambition and the studios at this moment in time allowing all of these directors to really kind of flex their muscles without a lot of, we hadn't reached Heaven's Gate yet. We hadn't been at the point where the studios were not going to let these visionaries sort of do what they wanted. And so because of that, we had honorable mentions from me like Toshiya Fujita for Lady Snowblood. If you have not seen the film Lady Snowblood, if you love Quentin Tarantino movies, go watch Lady Snowblood. You'll see what influence that movie and that director had on him. I've got George Roy Hill on the outside of my five, looking in for The Sting. I think it's a well-directed movie. I'm not giving him any shade, but I think there are better directing achievements that year. And then this is a bit of a wild card pick. This movie is out there. This director is out there, but he's very much a visionary, and that is Alejandro Jodorowsky for the film The Holy Mountain, which is confounding. If you don't like abstract art and you don't like things that are going to push the envelope visually and narratively, don't watch The Holy Mountain. But if you're okay with something a little more experimental and a little more daring, check out that film, and I think you'll be rewarded with some very interesting stuff. But here's my five. I've got Terrence Malick for Badlands. I've got Ingmar Bergman for Cries and Whispers. I've got William Friedkin for The Exorcist. I have Martin Scorsese for Mean Streets. Third time I've Third time I've nominated Scorsese, by the way. First one was for Hugo. Second one was for Taxi Driver. Very different movies. And then my fifth nominee is going to go to Peter Bogdanovich for Paper Moon. Now, with all due respect to Ralph and William Friedkin, who is an all-time legendary director, he has made countless films. I think what Frank and I talked about already, with the way that Friedkin pushed the envelope with what he wanted to get on screen and how much disregard he had for the actors, I had to like dock him points on the directing side of things because I just can't condone some of the stuff that he was doing there. I'm going to give my win to what I think might be in the conversation for best directorial debuts in film history. I've got the criterion, and it is majestic. It is Terrence Malick's Badlands, which is just a beautiful film. What I love about Terrence Malick is he's so mysterious, even still, all these years later. He doesn't really do interviews. There are only like so many pictures of him even on the internet. He's just not somebody who like goes out of his way to describe his process or what he's doing. He makes movies, he puts them out in the world, and he lets them speak for himself. And most of those movies are considered masterpieces for varying degrees. I think Badlands might still be the best Terrence Malick movie, and it's the first one he put out. And it captures a time period. It captures the spirit of that era, and it also is unflinching in showing sort of the dark side of humanity in Martin Sheen's character, and yet also capturing Sissy Spacek, like I mentioned earlier. She's still able to be grounded, and she's still able to hold on to her own morality, because most of what's happening in that movie from a violence standpoint, she's just kind of an innocent bystander to, more or less, and she's being pushed along by this dark character that's leading her, and she still manages to stay grounded to her own reality. And so I really appreciate what Malick captures in this film, and just visually, it's a remarkable looking piece of cinema. And so I'm going to give my win to Terrence Malick. Frank, let's see what directors you have up.
Well, I do have an honorable mention, and it hurts that I could not include him in the top 5. But I had to deduct points because I think that the film does begin to drag every now and then. Honorable mention goes to George Lucas for American Graffiti. Brilliant use of the songs, the soundtrack. Great job assembling a cast that is virtually a who's who of 1970s television. You have Ron Howard, who was, of course, Happy Days. You have Cindy Williams, Laverne and Shirley. Suzanne Summers was Three's Company. Mackenzie Phillips was One Day at a Time. Susan Richardson was Eight is Enough. Everybody, I mean, this was a launching pad for a lot of TV careers.
Didn't even get to Harrison Ford.
And I didn't even mention Harrison Ford yet. And Richard Dreyfuss. And so you definitely have a director who knows how to handle. Despite all of the ribbing that he's gotten for the quality of the dialogue in the Star Wars movies and the wooden acting in the prequels and his over-reliance on CGI and all the, just basically all the flack that he's gotten from the toxic fan base over the decades, American Graffiti proves that he was a director with a vision. And he was really committed to that vision. And he certainly poured a lot of himself into American Graffiti because it was a reflection of his own childhood. However, again, the reason why I'm including him as an honorable mention rather than one of the nominees is because I think that the film could have been trimmed here and there. There were a few scenes where the momentum was lost, and you're saying, okay, all right, when is it going to be dawn? When is it going to be daybreak? Come on, we've been following this same situation for 25 minutes. I think we can wrap it up and move on to the next storyline. So, honorable mention for Mr. Lucas. My 5 best director nominees. I have Martin Scorsese for Mean Streets. I have William Friedkin for The Exorcist. I have Terrence Malick for Badlands. I have Nicholas Roeg for Don't Look Now. And I have Robin Hardy for The Wicker Man. Now, let's put it this way. If you're making a horror movie, and it is not, even though it appears to be, a musical, and you pull this off with panache, as Robin Hardy does with The Wicker Man, then by gum, you're getting that Oscar. I give it to Robin Hardy for The Wicker Man. Now let's take a look. I have it right here. Let's just listen to the titles of a few of the songs that are in The Wicker Man. We have Corn Rigs. We have Maypole. We have Willow's Song. We have Chop Chop, Lullaby, The Masks, The Hobby Horse, Sunset. So, not only does this get best soundtrack from me, it gets best director. I will not go into the details of each of these songs, what makes each of them so memorable, so important, so tongue-in-cheek, but not funny because it's just so shocking. How do you pull off a balancing act like that and still maintain a career in the film industry? I'll tell you how. By being Robin Hardy and doing it the way he did it.
Awesome, Frank. That's such a cool pick because like The Wicker Man continues to get celebrated by all of the new people who find it and discover it every year. Obviously, like Ari Aster's Midsommar more recently, sort of like a fan base from that film then went back and saw folk horror of the past and found The Wicker Man. That movie gets celebrated for so many aspects of all of the greatness of it, and yet you never hear people talk about Robin Hardy, who had to do so much to orchestrate that thing. To your point, if you wrote down the concept of that movie on paper, it doesn't make any sense, and you'd probably be laughed out of the room. And then to actually visually put that on film and make it terrifying and still meaningful all these years later is an unbelievable achievement. I love that pick. I will also agree with you on George Lucas. He was a little bit lower on my list. I do agree that I think that he gets so much flack now for his screenplays, for better or worse, but American Graffiti, like to your point, it showed that he could do something more at that time. I mean, he also did THX 1138, and for mileage may vary on what people think of that movie, but it was a really heady concept and interesting film that showed he had a vision for something. I think like with American Graffiti, I'm in the same boat where for about 45 minutes to an hour, I feel it's pretty propulsive. And then, unlike the movie that it inspired years later, Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused, which I think keeps its foot on the pedal and keeps momentum until the end, I do think American Graffiti kind of loses steam in the last like 20 or 30 minutes. So that was why he just missed for me as well. He was just outside there, but that was a great shout having Lucas in, because I feel like nobody even really acknowledges George Lucas anymore other than the guy who did Star Wars, and he was more than that.
Absolutely. A lot of untapped talent that for his own reasons he just chose not to pursue.
I mean, I don't blame him. He's got a lot of money in the bank from doing what he did, so more power to him. All right, well, we have 4 vastly different options for this category, which really shows kind of the range of talent from this year. So the Academy nominated George Roy Hill for The Sting with their win, so you can vote for him. You can side with Ralph William Friedkin for The Exorcist. You can side with myself. I've got Terrence Malick for Badlands. Or you can go with Frank, who's got Robin Hardy for The Wicker Man. 2 horror nominees in there, and we are just a couple of months on the heels of John Carpenter on the show getting a win for The Thing. So the Revisionist Almanac, this show is always going to advocate for horror directors getting love, which the Academy rarely seems to want to do. So we got some horror love in this one for you too. All right, Frank, we are to the big one now, the Best Picture. Okay. So the actual 5 nominees in 1973 were American Graffiti, Cries and Whispers, The Exorcist, The Sting, and A Touch of Class, with The Sting getting the win. Okay, so as of 2025, this is the most recent year in which the 3 highest grossing movies were all nominated for a Best Picture. Those were American Graffiti, The Exorcist, and The Sting, which I could not believe that was a fact, but it was. And this was also a notable year because Julia Phillips made history on the night. She was the producer on The Sting, and she became the first female producer to win a Best Picture, which is a really cool thing. Now, because the Academy only nominated 5 movies in 1973, we will adhere to those rules, and Frank and I will only have 5 slots to give out. Frank, I will have you kick it off. Then I will go, and then we will give Ralph's pick at the very end. So, Frank, give us any honorable mentions you have out there, and then give us your 5 best picture and your winner.
I have one honorable mention, and I don't know if it's really appropriate to place it in this category of best picture, because technically it is a documentary feature. But the documentary feature that I think deserves a mention is Manson. This was a documentary on the so-called Manson family. They never called themselves that. That was the media's label for them. And it is just a really searing analysis, a really in-your-face look through news footage and interviews. It is, I mean, obviously the actual information presented in the documentary is dated because more facts have come out in the years since. But for 1973, for what it was, this was a documentary, split screen techniques. I mean, it wasn't just the content, it was also the way the content was packaged and delivered. So, Lawrence Merrick, I think that his Manson documentary deserves an honorable mention. As for Best Picture, I have The Exorcist, I have The Wicker Man, The Friends of Eddie Coyle, Badlands, and Serpico. And I'm just going to cut right to the chase because I cannot wait to give the Oscar for Best Picture of 1973 to The Wicker Man.
Okay, so this is your chance to get on the soapbox, and for people who have not seen The Wicker Man, win them over with why you have it as the defining 1973 movie.
Creativity. Creative storytelling. This could have been a straightforward folk horror film about a man, a cop, who travels to an island off the coast of Scotland, the Scottish Highlands, and he is investigating the disappearance of a little girl, and he's trying to get to the bottom of the mystery. And instead of focusing his energies on finding her, eventually whether he realizes it consciously or not, he realizes that what he's actually doing is he is spending his time judging and criticizing the residents of this island for living their lives the way that they do. Now, granted, it's not the way that I would live my life, and there were some definite question marks along the way. But still, if you don't agree with them, turn around and walk away. You don't have to sit there and try to convince them to become Christians. So I find that to be a really compelling story in and of itself anyway. But if you're going to add to it these songs that are presented in a way that is just audibly and visually engaging to the point where you are just riveted. And when you find yourself driving to work one morning, humming to yourself, corn rigs, and then you realize that you are humming a song from The Wicker Man in the car on the way to work, you think to yourself, there is something seriously wrong with me, and I'm in really desperate need of help. But at the same time, you're saying to yourself, but this is a tribute to Robin Hardy. So, The Wicker Man, to me, because it tells a very compelling story in such a unique, creative, uncompromisingly original way. That is storytelling. That is taking the art of film and saying, I am going to use this medium to convey this tale to unsuspecting audiences, and I am going to give them a finale that is just going to blow them out of the water. And the finale does indeed blow you out of the water.
Here
And it's so
for that.
beautifully shot. The cinematography, the sunsets, the water, all of it. It's just, I cannot say enough about this movie. I cannot say enough about The Wicker Man.
All right, The Wicker Man, best picture for Frank. Okay, let's go over to mine, and then like I said, we'll wrap up with Ralph, and we'll see where we stand. So, people always ask me to, usually in like listener questions after the fact, they'll say, okay, if you had a field of 10 like we do nowadays, what would your 10 be? So here would be the 5 that if I had an extra 5 spots, I'd pull them in. American Graffiti, Cries and Whispers, Don't Look Now, Mean Streets, and The Sting. So, Frank, you obviously very early front-loaded. You were not going to bring The Sting into the equation at the end. I kind of I tried to save it. I have some friends who revere The Sting. I have watched The Sting 3 times alone for this prep project over the last few months, just to see if it like would ever fully unlock for me. It didn't. I think The Sting is a great movie for what it is, but that is not worthy of a best picture in a year like this, where there were so many films of so much influence and greatness. I think that that's what undercuts my earlier sort of take that this year is on par with The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 years in 72 and 74. The Sting is just not the movie to elevate this year to that next level. So it's not in my 5. Here are the 5 though that I have. I've got Badlands. Should be no surprise I've nominated it multiple spots through here. First time either of us has mentioned this movie. My go-to martial arts film, Bruce Lee's iconic Enter the Dragon. I am a huge lover of mixed martial arts, and Enter the Dragon blew my mind when I saw it as a child. It expanded my world into something I'd never seen before. I couldn't find a place for it really anywhere else in all these other categories we've covered, but I feel like Enter the Dragon is such an influential piece of martial arts cinema that it had to be in my 5. I've got The Exorcist, I've got Paper Moon, and I've got The Wicker Man. And my win here, I already gave John Carpenter a win for director a couple of months ago in the horror category. I think now is the time for horror to truly be recognized with a Best Picture win. Now, Frank has already thrown a horror movie up there, but I'm going to put alongside it The Exorcist. I couldn't give William Friedkin the win for the directorial problems. However, the film as a whole, I think, deserves recognition. I also want to give the Academy credit in 1973 for putting this film up in the Best Picture race. I just think that they didn't have the gusto to truly... They didn't have the balls, quite frankly, to give this movie Best Picture in 1973, and I wish they did, and I feel like it's one of the great oversights of all time, because the movie is it's frightening as hell to begin with, and yet it also tells this powerful story on multiple levels of people dealing with grief and things that they can't, pain that they can't overcome, whether it's Father Karras or it's Chris and Reagan. There's so many human levels to The Exorcist that are far more lasting on me than the stuff with the actual exorcism, which scared me to death as a child, and now I go back to the movie because of all the human story in the film. There's that scene in specific where Father Karras is having the vision or the dream of his mother coming up the subway, and he can never get across the street, and that moment kind of sums up the film for me and what the movie is at its emotional core, and that's why this movie for me is the best film of 1973. Frank, you look very visually stimulated by what I just said there with that scene. Does that scene resonate with you as well?
That to me is such a tragic scene. It is so well shot. All you hear is all, other than the ticking of the clock, it's all silence. That's the only thing you hear is the ticking of the clock, the way that he is running towards his mother, trying to get her, the guilt that he feels over having put her in a medical facility because he can no longer care for her. Of course, the evil demon throws that in his face. Why'd you leave me here, Dimmy? She turns around and she goes back down into the subway. I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I have had nightmares like that. Not a nightmare of my mother walking up out of the subway, but nightmares where you're trying to reach someone that you desperately love who you just can never quite reach. They just keep walking away, either because they don't know that you're there or because you fear that they're turning their backs on you. I have had nightmares like that. And this one just, it exposed a really, really raw nerve, that scene.
Yeah, 100% for me. I have definitely had my own experiences with things like that you just can't quite explain, that sort of psychologically you wrestle with all of the time later. And so, yeah, The Exorcist for me is a powerful piece of cinema. It is far greater than just being a great horror movie. I think it is an iconic piece of filmmaking. And so I've got The Exorcist as my best picture. And Ralph also decided that he was going to give The Exorcist his best picture that year. So Ralph and I are in agreement, and you can vote for us you can vote with Frank, who has the Wicker Man, or you can vote with the Academy, who has the Sting. So there are two options here that can give horror a Best Picture win. Now, we have already had, quote unquote, a horror movie win Best Picture on the show, and that's a real life Best Picture winner, 1991's The Silence of the Lambs. Your mileage may vary if that's a true horror film or something else. To me, The Silence of the Lambs isn't like in the same realm of horror as The Exorcist. I understand the idea if you want to call it horror, but I think the idea of The Exorcist or The Wicker Man potentially winning a revised Best Picture on the show would really be a nice, bold statement for the horror community that horror films, a genre piece like this, deserves just as much recognition for being a piece of filmmaking greatness as a movie like The Sting or A Godfather or anything else that wins Best Picture. So I'm going to definitely advocate for horror any chance I get to, and I am so glad that Frank did the same with The Wicker Man. I didn't know where you were going to go, quite honestly, with your Best Picture, and so The Wicker Man was such a wonderful curveball that I was not preparing.
That's what the Oscars needs more of, is curveballs.
Exactly. That's why I'm hoping this year maybe we just like randomly get like a weapons nomination just for the sake of it, just to be like, hey, like we recognize the talent, we recognize what's out there. We'll probably get the Sinners nomination, but I would love for like a true like hardcore horror movie to kind of like crash into the celebration every now and then. It just doesn't feel like we ever get the opportunity. All right, before we do wrap things up though, I just want to remind everybody, a week after this episode goes up, I will be taking the time to do a special mailbag episode. People submitted a whole bunch of questions. I will go through all those questions. I will answer them. If Frank has the time, and I will leave it up to him, there's no expectation, but if he has the time to go through those questions as well, you may just hear Frank answering some of those for you in addition. All right, that's just going to wrap up this recording, but reminder, this is only the beginning. Our picks have been made, but now it's ultimately up to you, the fans, to decide what goes into the Almanac as the winner. So I will be putting up social media polls across 5 platforms in the coming days, and I need your votes to be cast. A reminder, the more places you follow the show, the more opportunity you can vote for the things that you love. Before we sign off, though, I just want to take a minute to let Frank plug all the awesome stuff he does. Frank, this is going to go up on Friday, December 5th. I would love to hear what's on the way from Reels of Cinema. Before, though, you do that, I want to plug something for you on your behalf. So for anyone out there who loves movie newsletters and loves reading cool stuff about film, Frank does a delightful newsletter. You're one of only maybe 2 or 3 newsletters I get in my email, but you're definitely the one I look forward to the most. You have one of the coolest newsletters out there because you hit me with just great stuff that I don't always get in my day-to-day like social media feed, and it's a really nice breath of fresh air. And every time I see a Frank newsletter, I immediately click in my inbox and read it right away. So please do me a favor, plug where people can subscribe to your newsletter, plug everything you have going over at Reels of Cinema.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate, very kind words. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. So my podcast is called Reels of Cinema. My previous podcast was Silver Screeners, which I'd been doing for almost 4 years. I retired that in April of this year, April of 2025. And Reels of Cinema is still in its first few months. So I pretty much went back to the beginning. And the rebrand, I think, was, to use your words, a breath of fresh air that I think I needed. As I've said before, I always prefer for people to say to me, "Oh, did you stop doing that?" as opposed to people saying to me, "Oh, are you still doing that?" So it was time. So Reels of Cinema is found easily on Spotify, Apple, Good Pods, every major podcasting platform. I am not on YouTube. I'm a high school teacher, and I think that probably explains why I am not on YouTube. But otherwise, maybe when I retire, I'll eventually go to YouTube. But so those are the podcasting platforms where you'll find Reels of Cinema. The newsletter, the Reels of Cinema newsletter, it's a free email. And as I say in each of my episodes, no ads, no product placement, just fun movie-related content. I don't sell anything. I don't try to get you to buy anything. I ask for nothing other than for you to read and enjoy. So if you would like to receive this newsletter in your inbox, everybody is BCC'd, so nobody sees anybody else's email IDs. So there's that security measure taken. Just simply send a quick request to reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com. Just simply put in the subject heading, "Please add me to your newsletter." I'll see the email ID from in the from field, and so you don't even have to say anything if you don't want to. Just simply say, please add me, or if you'd like to say hello, I'd love that. I love interaction with fellow film buffs, so please don't hesitate to initiate a conversation. I'd love to have one. So that's Reels of Cinema. And I also have a spin-off podcast called Movies Across the Pod, which I do with a friend of mine, Dave, who lives out in Liverpool, England. Movies Across the Pod is a show that we've been doing since May of 22, and that one can be found on Spotify primarily.
I love it, Frank. You do so much stuff out there. And just the other cool thing that I think makes our shows sort of similar in nature in terms of the social media structure is obviously a huge component of my show is online engagement and people being active parts of the process with polls and voting and all that stuff. And you do the same sort of concept over with Reels of Cinema, where you always have all these different polls and things that people can vote on all the social media platforms. So I love that. And you also do just a lot of fun stuff. I would recommend people follow you on every platform where you're out there, because you'll do things like fun facts for on this day in history. And you just did one yesterday or the day before where I was like, oh, I just learned something I had never even thought about before. And you stimulate me and my brain with all the movie stuff that you put out there. So I just want to say, as a fan of your show and your work, thank you for what you do. I hope you continue doing it for a long time to come, because it's been a real treat to get to know you over the last year and a half, 2 years now. And I'm grateful for you to take the time on this. I appreciate it, Frank.
I feel the same way. I appreciate the invitation to be on your show. It is truly a privilege for me to be here, and I love listening to your shows too. So right back at you. I mean, the feeling is mutual. I respect so much of not just the show itself, not just your content, but the way that you promote your content, the way that I mean, all of your successes. Congratulations. The big announcement episode that you released just this week, which by the time this uploads will be about a month old, but still doesn't mean it's any less worthy of huge congratulations. You deserve it.
I appreciate that, buddy. And I also want to throw quickly out there, again, Ralph could not be here, as I said at the beginning of this. Had a tragic incident in his family come up, and we want to wish him all the best. All of the condolences go out to him and his family. However, I want you to definitely check out Ralph's work out there in the movie content space. So if you would like to hear more of Ralph's movie opinions that he wasn't able to be a part of here, go check out a friend of the show, Tom and Dana Duncan, over at the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast. They've had Ralph on 2 times already. He did Jaws and Magnolia, 2 fantastic movies, great episodes. And he's going to be joining the guys over there about a week from when this comes out in December. He's going to be joining them for 1995's Heat from Michael Mann, which should be a lot of fun to hear that discussion. So Ralph is still doing a lot of stuff out there in the movie space. Please go support him and all the work he's doing. I also hope down the road Ralph will be able to come back on this show at some point. But again, that's what he's dealing with right now is significantly more important than us just talking silly stuff about movies right here. All right, and please look out for the upcoming first episode of Season 3. I can't believe we are already talking about Season 3 into the 3rd year of the show, January. I'm going to be joined by 2 first-time guests. I'm going to have Frankie Sparks and Scott Eisenberg, the husband and wife duo from Shoot the Flick, and they're going to be helping me kick off that season. We're going to be covering one of the all-time great Best Picture lineups in the 21st century. We're going to be talking about the year 2007. So Atonement, Juno, Michael Clayton, There Will Be Blood, but of course the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men won Best Picture. We will see where the 3 of us fall on that. You can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, Letterboxd, Threads, TikTok, everywhere. The handle's Rev Almanac. There's going to be timestamps on this episode, so if you want to go back to a specific category, listen to what Frank and I had to say as you tally your votes. Please do that. I will have all of Frank's information in the description. Check him out. Check his newsletter, his podcast, everything he's doing. Frank, again, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to do this. And we have a standing date every fall to talk about Freddy Krueger. We will be doing that until I'm 50, I think, by the time we finish that series, as I almost turned 40 right now. And it's something that I look forward to each and every year. It's just this wonderful thing to have on my calendar, and I appreciate you for always welcoming me back to your show over and over. So thank you, Frank.
I'm thrilled that you're able to and that you're willing to do it. And one last thing, my God, you're young.
I turned
Okay.
40 in 16 days from the time we're recording this, and so I'm not feeling so young, but thank you.
Well, I'm 51 years old, and to me, you are young.
And with that, Frank and I say thank you. It's been just a treat of a season on this show. I cannot believe I am 2 years down. We are going to keep pushing on bigger and better things. For everybody out there, I'm Andrew, and I can't wait to see you next time.